Okay. For today, we're going to go through module 4, which is repetition for the first part. So let's start. Basically, module 4 is AWS cloud security. So basically, security is the highest priority at Amazon Web Services. AWS delivers scalable. Scalable maksudnya benda yang boleh naik, boleh turun lah. Boleh control. Cloud in computer environment that is designed for high availability and dependability, while providing the tools that enable you to run a wide range of application. So helping to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your system and data is critical to AWS. And so it's maintaining customer trust and confidence. So in enterprise, yang pertama yang dia orang amat penting dan amat tekankan ialah berkaitan dengan impact kewangan lah. Anything yang impact maksudnya kena bayar duit, kena charge dan sebagainya, is very important lah, very important. So nombor dua benda yang dia orang paling takut ialah security lah, security ataupun impact of reputation loss. Kan, contohnya kalau kita kata ada hackers dah masuk CIMB kan. So hackers dah curi password dan sebagainya dalam CIMB contoh. So kalau kita sebagai customer CIMB tentulah kita takut. And then kebanyakan mungkin ada yang akan berhenti daripada menggunakan CIMB and then switch to my bank and so on. So first ialah financial, so security ni impact to financial. Yang keduanya ialah dia panggil reputational loss or reputational impact lah. Okay. So, ini nanti untuk lab 4 ni kita akan ada siapa pula untuk control ni. Ni masalah. Jangan untuk control lah. Dah nak kena yang ni lah. Ya. Tapi sebelum tu, let's see, siapa yang dah masuk AWS Academy? So please masuk. Tengok siapa ni. So ada 3 orang. Beta, are you here? Beta, are you in here? Or Muniswaran? Munis? So Munis and
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Beta, you did not accept yet the email.
Sir,
Do
I
you
tried writing. Hello?
Apa dia? Yes.
Sir, saya sudah try, sir. Tapi yang email saya tu dia tak dapat, sir.
Email tak dapat. So bagi email baru ke? Ada email baru ke? Ke saya nak resend?
Boleh reset ke, sir?
Resend. Saya try
Ya.
resend. So try tengok. Beta, are you in here? So I will resend also. Okay. That's it. Let's see the modules. So yang dapat tu sila buat yang introduction module 1. So go through everything. So video tu boleh kalau dah macam dah baca dah sebagainya boleh boleh apa ni skip, boleh ni boleh dah tengok balik dan sebagainya lah kerana nak tahu kan. Go to complete all item for module 1, 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4 at least for today lah. So lepas ni hari ni kita akan buat lab 1 ni. Okay. So lab 1 melalui ni lah, melalui sini kita tekan. Saya tak sure, saya punya tekan dapat lain lah. You guys tekan tak sure. Saya tengok untuk student ni. Soalnya saya nampak student ni lah. So you guys nampak lain lah. Saya should bagi letter. Okay. So mana ni? Ya. Okay. Okay, yang tadi AWS Cloud Security. Ni control. So basically bila kita after completing this module, you should be able to recognize the shared responsibility model. Identify the responsibility of the customers and AWS. Recognize IAM users, groups and roles. Describe different types of security credentials in IAM. Identify the steps to securing a new AWS account. Explore IAM users and groups. Recognize how to secure AWS data, and then recognize AWS compliance programs. So basically macam saya update sebelum ni. Actually untuk customer, dia responsible to basically untuk data dia lah. Data untuk the platform, application, identity, assessment users, everything setting about users, kita kena set sendiri lah. So operating system yang kita nak pakai, network, firewall, configuration, semua yang kita set tu kita tak boleh letak atas AWS lah. Kita yang kena set, anything happen kita yang should be responsible. And then encryption, all the encryption yang dekat pada server, dekat kalau server side ataupun client side, dalam file system, all internet trafficking protection, encryption, integrity. So yang ni setting ni, yang ni kita kena responsible. So untuk others like software untuk compute, storage, database, networking ni semua all responsible of AWS. Kalau ada down kan sebagainya, ada bug lah sebenarnya, so AWS akan responsible on that lah. And then the infrastructure of AWS, macam hardware yang real infrastructure kat data center, hardware AWS global, infrastructure like dekat regions, availability zones, each location ni semua under responsible of AWS. So AWS responsibility is for physical security of data centers, hardware, and then network infrastructure, ada physical network infrastructure and virtualization infrastructure. So benda yang dia convert ni semua hardware, semua yang dia convert semua data ni jadi macam digital is called virtualization software infrastructure dan sebagainya lah. This one is under AWS. Okay. So contohnya AWS Service Compute Storage Database Networking, global infrastructure, semua regions, availability zones, each location semua under AWS responsibility. Dia akan jaga. Kalau down kat site tu pun dia yang bertanggungjawab. So untuk customer responsibility, dia customer data, application yang kita pakai ataupun kita input dalam cloud, IAM ni macam user punya control lah, user configuration and so on. So kita yang kena responsible. And then operating system, network and firewall configuration. And then macam saya cakap tadi untuk encryption all under us lah. Yes. And then service characteristic and security responsible. Sebab dia ada certain service yang di offer kepada customer. Yang famous ialah 3 ni lah, yang major lah. Satu infrastructure as a service. Yang ni selalunya macam cakap besar-besar yang ada IT department, dia akan guna yang ni lah, dia akan control macam virtualization infra lah. Macam compute apa semua dia akan control setting lah. So customer has more flexibility over configuring networking and storage setting. Customer is responsible for managing more aspects of the security and customer configures the access control. So they manage almost everything on virtual infra, not the physical infra. Virtual infra. So they control setting dekat EC2, setting dekat compute, setting dekat storage, setting dekat network dan sebagainya. So dia yang control. Tapi ada customer yang ambil service dekat cloud ni, dia panggil platform as a service. Platform as a service ni dia macam kita ada application, kita nak letak kat cloud je. So kita tak nak fikir sangat tentang compute ke storage apa semua tu. So apa yang berlaku ialah bawah tu pun kalau kita ambil service ni, customer does not need to manage the underlying infrastructure macam compute power, storage storage size, network punya architecture dia tak perlu fikir lah, sebab dia fikir pasal application je. So AWS handles the operating system, database fetching, firewall configuration, disaster recovery, and customer can focus on managing code or data. So basically dia letak application dengan coding dia. So kalau coding tu perlukan compute power, dia AWS akan bagi automatically. Dia akan buat auto scaling sendiri. So kita tak perlu fikir benda tu, kita kena kita bayar je. Kita tak manage. Kalau anything down dan sebagainya, and related to compute power, compute storage dan sebagainya, itu under AWS responsibility. And ada satu yang major juga, yang last sekali, yang ni basically dia panggil software as a service. Basically yang ni senang je. Yang ni dia pun tak ada application, dia nak guna je software yang ada dekat cloud tu. Software is centrally hosted. Dia macam contohnya Google Sheet kan. Google Sheet kita buat something and kita share with everyone. So everyone key in something on that. So basically kita tak manage pun Google Sheet tu. Tapi kita hanya nak guna je software tu. Software tu akan digunakan lah oleh everyone everywhere. So software is centrally hosted, licensed on subscription model or pay as you go. And then services are typically accessed via web browser, mobile app, application programming interface, API. And then customer do not need to manage the infrastructure that supports the service. So satu, dia punya coding kita tak perlu fikir nak deploy dan sebagainya. The infrastructure pun kita tak perlu fikir nak guna berapa storage, nak guna berapa compute power dan sebagainya. Let's skip this first. So takeaway, AWS and the customer shared security responsibilities. AWS is responsible for security of the cloud. Customer is responsible for security in the cloud. Security of the cloud and security in the cloud. So anything in the cloud yang dalam infra semua under us customer and AWS and responsible for security of the cloud. Maksudnya data dia punya physical selainnya major dia physical infrastructure lah. And the software that control the virtualization. And then AWS is responsible for protecting the infrastructure macam hard disk dan sebagainya. For service that are categorized as infrastructure as a service, the customer is responsible for performing necessary security configuration and management tasks. For example, guest OS update, security patches, firewall, security group configuration. So yang ni kan, kalau dekat industri memang regular lah. Dia orang memang ikut peraturan. IT ni dia ada peraturan yang bestnya IT tu lah. IT ni dia memang common and dia ikut peraturan lah. Sebenarnya industri sebab anything happen dia akan check balik. Okay, kenapa jadi macam ni? Kenapa down? Kenapa ni? Check tengok dia orang tak apply patch. Ataupun every week dia orang tak buat checking, tak ada audit dan sebagainya. Memang kena lah. So sebab tu walaupun kadang-kadang kita je lah kat komputer kita jarang kita nak update kan. Sebab berat kan. Tapi dekat industri is a must, especially yang besar-besar dia orang takut satu impact kewangan, yang kedua security. Bila ada je negligence, macam ada problem, kita lalai, memang satu yang duit mungkin boleh bayar tapi reputation tu. Reputation. Contoh macam tu je lah, macam CMB dah tak selamat. Reputation tu berapa lama nak kena bina balik. Dia orang takut itu. So AWS Identity and Access Management. So yang ni basically untuk section kita awal-awal sekali bila kita buat cloud, kita nak introduce user lah. Siapa yang nak user ni, ataupun orang nak tengok saja, ataupun orang nak buat programmer ke, orang finance ke apa semua lah. So yang ni lah service yang penting lah. So dipanggil untuk di AWS dipanggil AWS Identity and Access Management, IAM. Identity, Access and Management lah. Allows you to control access to compute storage, database and application services in the AWS cloud. IAM can be used to handle authentication and to specify and enforce authorization policies so that you can specify which users can access which services. And then IAM is a tool that centrally manage access to launching, configuring, managing and terminating resources in your AWS account. It provides granular control over access to resources, including the ability to specify exactly which API calls the users cause the user is authorized to make to each service. So whether you use AWS Management Console, the AWS CLI command line interface, or the AWS Software Development Kits SDK, every call to AWS service is an API call. Okay. And then with IAM, you can manage which resources can be accessed by who and how these resources can be accessed. You can grant different permissions to different people for different resources. And then, for example, you might allow some users full access to Amazon EC2. EC2 ni compute processing power kan. And then Amazon S3 yang ni macam storage. Amazon DynamoDB apa ni database. Amazon Redshift pun database and other AWS services. However, for other users, you might allow read-only access to only a few S3 buckets. Okay. So dia depends pada user lah. Ada user yang perlukan access, write and edit. Bukan ni, ada user yang boleh baca je, dia tak boleh edit. Similarly, you might grant permission to other users to administer only specific EC2 instance. You could also allow a few users to access only the account billing information, but nothing else. IAM is feature of your AWS account and it is offered at no additional charge. Okay. So to understand how to use IAM to secure your AWS account, it's important to understand the role, the role and function of each of the four IAM components. And IAM users is a person or application that is defined in AWS account that must make API calls to AWS products. Each each user each user must have a unique name with no spaces in the name within the AWS account and a set of security credential that is not shared with other users. These credentials are different from the AWS account root user security credentials. Okay, I am user, a person or application that can authenticate with an AWS account. For the other jenis, I am user, I am group, I am policy, and I am role. So I am role is a collection of IAM group is a collection of IAM users. IAM users collection of IAM users that are granted identical authorization. So you can use IAM groups to simplify specifying and managing permission for multiple users. So senang lah. Contohnya kalau dia ada group macam group student kan. So kita just apply je untuk certain group IAM user yang dalam group tu semua kita apply sebagai IAM group. And then we have IAM policy. IAM policy ni dia dalam bentuk programming especially JSON lah, JSON type programming. So kita boleh tengok dia macam ada programming, dia tulis peraturan tu dalam bentuk programming. So an IAM policy is a document that defines permission to determine what users can do in the AWS account. And a policy typically grants access to specific resources and specifies what the user can do with those resources. Policies can also explicitly deny access. So the document that defines which resources can be accessed and the level of access to each resources. Okay. Saya ulang sekali lagi lah. IAM policy is a document that defines permissions to determine what users can do in the AWS account. A policy typically grants access to specific resources and specifies what the user can do with those resources.
Halo, Assalamualaikum. Dan luar biasa.
Oh, sorry. Network. Bukan network down. Nak pergi tutup network. Ya. So, sorry, I will continue. So before that, can you still hear and see the slide? Anyone? Anyone? Hello?
Boleh, sir.
Okay, Jen. Okay. So for and I IAM role is a tool for granting temporary access to specific AWS resources in an AWS account. So sometimes kita perlukan certain time kita provide IAM role dekat orang tu lah for specific time. Okay, temporary access. So authentication as an IAM user to gain access. So when you define an IAM user, you select what types of access the user is permitted to use. Okay. So authentication is a basic computer security concept. A user or system must first approve their identity. Consider how you authenticate yourself when you go to the airport. So, and you want to get through airport security so that you can catch your flight. So in this situation, you must present some form of identification to the security official to prove who you are before you can enter a restricted area. And then a similar concept applies for gaining access to AWS resources in the cloud. So when you define an IAM user, you select what types of access the user is permitted to use to access AWS resources. You can assign two different types of access to users. One is programmatic access, and then and also AWS management console access. You can assign programmatic access only console access only, or you can assign both types of access. So if you grant programmatic access, the IAM user will be required to present an access key ID and secret access key. So when they make an AWS API call by using the AWS CLI command line interface, the AWS SDK or some other development tool. So basically yang ada yang ada application dan sebagainya, dia akan guna ni lah AWS CLI or AWS SDK. So dia akan panggil, dia akan guna AWS API lah call. Okay, if you grant AWS management console access, the IAM user will be required to fill in the fields that appear in the browser logging window. So the user is prompted to provide either the 12-digit account ID or the corresponding alias. The user must also enter their IAM user name and password. If multi-factor authentication, MFA prompts for authentication code. Okay. Then I am MFA. AWS services and resources can be accessed by using the AWS Management Console, the AWS CLI, or through SDK and APIs. For increased security, AWS recommend enabling MFA, multi-factor authentication. So with MFA, users and systems must provide an MFA token in addition to the regular sign-in credentials. So before they can access AWS services and resources. Options for generating the MFA authentication token include virtual MFA compliant applications such as Google Authenticator or Auth two-factor authentication. So UTF security key devices and hardware NFA devices. So authorization, what actions are permitted? So tadi authentication, yang ni authorization pula. So authorization is the process of determining what permissions a user or a service or application should be granted. After a user has been authenticated, they must be authorized to access AWS services. So by default, IAM users do not have permissions to access any resources or data in an AWS account. So yeah, yang tu yang memang proper lah in IT security, dia memang macam tu. So by default, dia memang tak boleh guna anything. So kita mesti grant permission based on requirement. So dia perlukan A. So kita bagi A sajalah. Dia perlukan A dengan B. So kita bagi A dengan B. So kita tak boleh bagi terus okay boleh guna semua. Or kita boleh just A, B, C terus kita bagi tanpa requirement. Okay. So instead you must explicitly grant permissions to a user, group or role by creating a policy, which is a document in JavaScript object notation JSON format. Okay. And then a policy lists permissions that allow or deny access to resources in the AWS account. So dia ada policies. So yang ni authorization dia. So to assign permission to a user, group or role, you must create an IAM policy or find an existing policy in the account. So there are no default permissions. All actions in the account are denied to the user by default, implicit deny. So unless those actions are explicitly allowed, any actions that you do not explicitly allowed are denied. So any action that you explicitly deny are always denied. So the principle of least privilege. Okay, ini prinsip dia. Prinsip dia kita bagi paling lowest sekali security. Is an important concept in computer security. It promotes that you grant only the minimal user privilege needed to the user based on the needs of your users. When you create an IAM policies, it is a best practice to follow this security advice of granting least privilege, determine what users need to be able to do, and then craft policies for them. And then let the user perform only those tasks. Start with a minimum set of permissions and grant additional permissions as necessary. So mula bagi paling sikit, and then kita add on bila dia perlu lah. Doing so is more secure than starting with permission that are too broad, then later trying to lock down the permissions granted. Note that the scope of the IAM service configuration is global. The settings are not defined at an AWS region level. IAM setting apply across all AWS regions. Okay, saya ulang semula. Note that the scope of IAM service configurations is global, so setting apply across all AWS regions. So kalau kita ada user ni, kita punya sistem ni ada seluruh dunia kan, ada seluruh region. So bila kita set user ni, so user ni akan boleh masuk semua tempat, semua region kita lah. Dia bukan terikat pada satu region je. So IAM policies. So an IAM policy is a formal statement of permissions that will be granted to an entity. Policies can be attached to any IAM entity, and entities include Uh, entities include users, groups, roles, or resources. For example, you can attach a policy. You can attach a policy to AWS resources that will block all requests that do not come from an approved internet protocol IP address range. Okay. And then these policies specify what actions are allowed, which resources to allow the actions on, and what the effect will be when the user requests access to the resources. And then the order in which policies are evaluated has no effect on the outcome of the evaluations. All policies are evaluated and the result is always that the request is either allowed or denied. So when there is a conflict, the most restrictive policies apply. So bila kita buat programming kan, kita letak yang mana nak execute first kan. Bila di atas, then dia akan baca di atas dulu, lepas tu dia baca yang bawah dan sebagainya lah. Tapi dalam kes ni dia akan baca semua and dia apply yang mana paling restrict lah. Kalau dia ada allow, dia ada restrict, so dia akan ambil restrict. Okay. 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 Let take a 5 minutes break and then we continue. So right now 12:18. So maybe 12:25. Okay. Thank you. So kita break for 5 minutes. Okay. Kita sambung kejap. Kita break lama sikit. So there are two types of IAM policies, identity-based policies, and then resource-based policies. So identity-based policies are permissions policies that you can attach to a principal or identity, such as IAM user, role, or group. And these policies control what actions that entity can perform on which resources and under what conditions. And then identity-based policies can be further categorized as managed policies, which is stand-alone identity-based policies that you can attach to multiple users, groups, and roles in your AWS account. Okay, dalam identity-based ada uh, managed policies, and then ada inline policies, policies that you create and manage, and that are embedded directly into a single user group or role. Okay, and then resource based policies are JSON policy documents that you attach to a resource such as S3 bucket. S3 bucket ni lah, S3 ni macam storage lah. And these policies control what actions a specified principal can perform on that resource and under what condition. Okay, so basically dia identity. And then this another resource ni macam contohnya S3 ke database ke compute ke, kita attach dekat resource kita, bukannya pada identity lah. So yang ni identity dia attach ke IAM user or IAM group or IAM role. As mentioned previously, IAM policy documents are written in JSON. And the example of IAM policy grants user access only to the following resources. For example, the DynamoDB table whose name is represented by table name. So effect allow uh, uh, give users access to specific DynamoDB table and specific DynamoDB and table name. Okay, and the AWS accounts S3 bucket. So Amazon S3 bucket, whose name is represented by a bucket name and all the objects that it contains. And then the IAM policy also includes an explicit deny, effect deny element, the not deny, effect deny. The not resource element helps to not resource element helps to ensure that users cannot use any other DynamoDB or S3 actions or resources except the actions and resources that are specified in the policy. Even if permissions have been granted in another policy, an explicit deny statement takes precedence over an allow statement. Okay. While identity-based policies are attached to a user group or role, resource-based policies are attached to a resource, such as an S3 bucket. So these policies specify who can access the resource and what actions they can perform on it. So resource policies are defined in line only, which means that you define the policy on the resource itself instead of creating a separate IAM policy document that you attach. For example, to create an S3 bucket policy, a type of resource-based policy, on an S3 bucket, navigate to the bucket, click the permission tabs and click the bucket policy button and define the JSON formatted policy document there. And Amazon S3 access control list, ACL, is another example of resource-based policy. So the diagram shows two different ways that the user marry major. So user marry major could be granted access to objects in the S3 bucket that is named photo. Okay, photos. So on the left, you see an example of an identity-based policy. An IAM policy that grants access to the S3 bucket. On the left, you see an example of identity-based policy, and IAM policy that grants access to the S3 bucket is attached to the marry major user. So they attach dekat user. This policy is attached dekat user. So on the right, you see an example of resource-based policy. So this is policy and attached dekat S3 bucket. So the S3 bucket policy for the photos bucket specifies that the user marry major is allowed to the list and read the objects in the bucket. Note that you could define a deny statement in a bucket policy to restrict access to specific IAM users, even if the users are granted access in separate identity-based policies. And explicit deny statement will always take precedence over any allow statement. For example, like this one, kita dah dekat sini kita apply dia apa ni deny. Kat sini kita tulis allowed. So basically bila allowed dengan deny configuration bertembung, basically dia akan ambil deny lah. Deny akan precedence over any allow statement. So IAM policies enables you to fine tune privilege that are granted to IAM users, groups and roles. So when IAM determines whether a permission is allowed, IAM first checks for okay. I think kita stop kat sini. Stop kat sini kita. Petang ni pukul apa? Should be petang ni. Petang ni pukul 4 tak silap. Okay. Kita stop sini, kita continue petang ni. Berarti dalam pukul 4 kot. Kalau tak silap saya lah. Anyone can confirm? 4 kan? So 4 nanti kita continue. Okay. Alright. So okay everyone, thank you very much for joining. So let's meet at 4 o'clock in the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.